and good evening if you're watching this during the evening. I usually record these during the evening, so you might be seeing them in the evenings. My name is Cheyenne Nielsen. I'm an American Fork librarian as well as a professional freelance editor. I've been a writer my whole life. Adult Writers Club is a program that I will have been starting up as of today, and we'll be publishing a video every Thursday, fingers crossed, as long as I don't get sick. At the end of this month, instead of having a YouTube lesson, I will be hosting a meeting in person for writers who want to come and join us on March 30th, 2023 from 8 to 9 p.m. at the American Fork Library. I'll give more details on that as more details arise. I hope to see a lot of you there. That would be fantastic to get to meet you and talk to you about your writing and what you're working on and what you're learning. Today's lesson is going to be talking about Deus Ex Machina. What is it, how to avoid it, and why it ruins stories. Now, some of you may have heard this term, some of you may not have heard this term before. As a result, I have a definition over on this side screen that I'm going to be reading off for you, as well as a couple examples and various tips and tricks to help you avoid this in your stories. Alright, Deus Ex Machina is an unexpected power or event saving a seemingly hopeless situation, especially as a contrived, this is the key word here, contrived plot device in a play or a novel, or in today's day and age as well, movie/cinema. It comes in many forms. There's so many different versions of Deus Ex Machina out there and so many different problems that can arise. However, the main three that are most complained about and that I see occurring the most often are the three examples that I'm going to give. So the first example that I'm going to give is what I'm going to call the main character despite all odds. So I'm going to call it despite all odds. Throughout the whole novel, the main character is losing their magic abilities, and then suddenly at the last second, when all seems lost and the character is about to die for no reason at all, no foreshadowing, no nothing, they suddenly regain full control of their abilities and save the entire world. Now, even though this can seem like a cool ending, the problems come in here where the readers feel like you cheated. They honestly feel like you didn't have them earn it, you didn't explain it. It makes it seem more fantasy than reality. And even if it is a fantasy novel or a supernatural novel or a superpowers novel, we want it to feel real. That's the whole fun of fantasy, is that it feels real. So it's better to have realistic fantasy, where it feels real, even if it's not. Another great example is the character seems like all is lost, aka generally they are dying or severely mortally wounded. And yet, somehow, a character that is barely referenced, barely foreshadowed, barely even cares, for no reason at all other than to fix this problem, shows up and saves them. Now, this can be done well if you foreshadow the character, if you foreshadow that they are the love interest, or if you foreshadow that they secretly might be their father, or what have you. But the problem occurs here when you don't foreshadow or don't explain their relationship, and some random stranger comes and saves them for no reason, and then poof, they disappear and aren't really heard from or utilized in the rest of the series. This makes it feel, like I said, once again, like they're cheating. There's no real reason. People act, generally, unless they're a psycho, they generally act on reason. They act on logic, they act on emotion that has a reason behind it. For example, a mother would try to save their daughter, a lover would try to save their lover, those kinds of things. However, generally, in this particular case, the reason it becomes Deus Ex Machina is because it's a total stranger or a semi-total stranger that for no reason other than the fact that you need them to, comes and rescues the main character from certain death. And especially certain death becomes the problem. Why do they have some special ability? If so, why was this not foreshadowed? Why does this come up at the last second? Why didn't we hear about this before? We like to have foreshadowing. So even if you have this occur, go back and fix it. Fix the foreshadowing. We'll go more into depth on how to fix it later. The last and final example that I also see quite commonly is and this does happen in books that have been published and have worked out. It's not to say that you can never do this, it's just that it doesn't make your story as good as it could have been, and a lot of readers get upset because of it. I know several books that have actually had this particular example that I'm about to give, and it made me so frustrated with how it ended, and I didn't realize this until I became an editor and writer myself, why it made me so frustrated. But the reason it made me so frustrated is because it was Deus Ex Machina. It was them rescuing the character in a way that just didn't make sense to me and wasn't satisfying. So this last example I'm just going to call Burst of Power. So basically, they're super powerful throughout the entire series. The main character is just absolutely bad A. They never grow. They just are at their top level the whole series. And then, for some reason, the villain, despite being less powerful than the main character the whole time, continues to somehow evade them to random amounts of flukes and coincidences and various random problems. And then suddenly, at the very end, we've built up this final battle so much, and you're so hyped, and you're so ready to see them fight. And then, in one hit, the main character completely obliterates the villain. There's no final battle, there's no epic, will they, won't they win. It's just straight up, they win, let's all go home. Now this is frustrating because you've built up all this tension only to basically say, finger guns, goes away now, pow. That's not satisfying. You need that final battle. You need that tension. You need that will they, won't they. You need them to be rooting for the main character rather than so frustrated that the main character just won inexplicably that you feel cheated, honestly, as a reader. You feel like you earned that final battle that you wanted so desperately, and yet you didn't get it. It's frustrating. All right, how to avoid it. Rewriting the scenes so that you give them the proper due. So as a result, proper foreshadowing, proper explanation as to why it will work. If you're going to have them be super powerful the whole time, and the reason the villain keeps getting away, have the villain start to grow in power too. Have it be that, oh yes, the villain escapes based on a fluke, but because he escapes based on that fluke, he realizes he needs to work a little harder, to get a little better, to get stronger. So by the time you have that final battle, the villain's like, I may have won based on luck so far, but it isn't going to be luck anymore. And he kicks butt. And that is okay. You need the villain to kick some butt, because that way it feels all the sweeter when the superhero finally tastes victory, when that main character finally overcomes the greatest evil. Or if they are evil, I guess, overcomes the greatest good, but that's a whole other story. Another way to avoid it is to properly build your world. Make sure you don't have any plot holes. This is the biggest problem. You want your readers to have questions and little queries and curiosities throughout your novel, but you don't want them to have so many questions, so many plot holes, that it's basically just one giant block of Swiss cheese. You're constantly running into more holes than matter. You need to make sure that when you're developing your plot, it makes sense, it runs cohesively, and you don't run into hiccups and problems where you just kind of explain them away, you gloss over them. Don't gloss over things unless you absolutely have to, and even then, generally don't gloss over the important things. Only gloss over things that need to be glossed over, like, oh, I guess they ate this for lunch and it doesn't super matter. Unless they get made fun of for that thing for lunch, then don't gloss over that thing. We need to know what it is. What are they getting made fun of for? Certain things are important, other things are not. You need to use discretion, but make sure, most importantly, there are no plot holes. Also make sure that your magic system makes sense. Your magic system needs to be well built. It needs to be strong. It needs to be sturdy. It needs to have rules, most importantly of all. Some magic systems don't have a ton of rules, but what magic system rules you do have, you need to make sure you don't break or you don't bend them unless you explain why you can break or bend them. And don't just do it for the sake. This is another problem. Just do it for the sake of Deus Ex Machina. Say, well, that rule doesn't work for me anymore, so we're going to come up with some random reason why it works. No, build up. explain that for some reason inexplicably foreshadow. Some reason inexplicably it didn't work this one time, and it's like, okay, why didn't it work this one time? And don't just leave it till the very end of the novel. Give foreshadow as to why it didn't work over and over again. Explain, well, maybe it was because of this, maybe it was because of that. Give hints rather than just saying, oh, and now we finally discovered it at the very last second. You gotta make sure you have some prior foreshadowing. Make sure it feels good. With the rest of that being said, you also have to, if you're doing the savior character, the person who rescues them from death at the last second, you got to make sure that that savior character has a place in your novel. That they are a solid character, they are a solid person, and they have a reason for saving them. Are they the best friend? Are they the lover? Are they the mother? Are they the father? Are they their secretly lost twin? You got to foreshadow these types of things, and you got to make sure that their relevance in the story has deep grounding. It has to have roots. You can't just pull out a plant from another point and then stuff it in your novel. You gotta make sure you build those roots so that when that character comes in and saves them, you are cheering that character on and you're like, yes, I'm so glad so-and-so showed up. You're not like, who the heck is that? They showed up once and I don't remember them because it was on page 20 and we're now on page 220. It needs to be cohesive. Alright, now to explain why you need to avoid Deus Ex Machina, why it ruins stories. I explained a little bit of it earlier, but this is to go a little bit more in depth as to why Deus Ex Machina should generally be avoided. It ultimately feels like your readers are being cheated. I know I've said this about 1,000 times now, but it does. Your readers feel like they earned certain quality writing points from you. And ultimately, it feels like you cheated if you just cut their legs out from under them and sweep it all under the rug and say, all those magic rules I had, throw them all out. All this world building I had, I don't care about those plot holes. It feels like lazy writing. It ruins the suspension of disbelief, especially in fantasy and science fiction. People assume that because it's fantasy and science fiction, you can get away with it. That's not true. You can only get away with that in kids' books. And by kids' books, I mean anywhere from 7 to 9-year-olds. Once you get into 10-year-olds, they won't take that crap anymore. Some of them might, but most of the time, generally, you want a 10 to 12 age group. As a result of that 10 to 12 age group, 11, 12, they're going to start noticing these things, and they're going to feel cheated if you don't make sure to explain what is happening and guide them along. And make sure that you don't spoon feed them, but make sure to foreshadow it properly and that the rules stay, the plot holes are covered, it's a solid, cohesive novel. They're not constantly falling into plot holes. I mean, everyone hates potholes on the road, right? Don't have any plot holes in your story, just like you wouldn't want potholes on your road. Follow all the rules, just like you don't want some random person stealing something from you. You want other people to follow the rules, so should you in your writing. You should try to follow your own rules, unless you have purposely foreshadowed that the rules might be broken later. And explain why they need to be broken, why they're broken. Alright, readers might also feel that with the unreality, even if it's fantasy or a superhero novel, they might start to feel like that main character is no longer relatable. They might feel like, oh, hey, they did it because they're them, not because of any other reason. This is where superheroes get some flack. They need to feel relatable, because otherwise it's just, oh yeah, Superman saved the city because he's Superman. I could never do that. You want your readers to feel inspired. You want them to feel like, hey, I could do this. And so even if they have superpowers, even if they have magic, you need to make it so they feel like, hey, I could do this too. I think that's really cool. I feel relatable to them. They're not so overpowered that they don't feel human. Your overpowered people still should feel human. And even then, I would say be wary of what's called Mary Sue and Marty Stew. We're going to talk about that in another video. But basically, where they're so overpowered, it's unrealistic. You do have to have checks and balances. Alright. The next and final point that I'm going to mention with Deus Ex Machina is, especially on a first book, you can't really get away with this. Most of the time where we see Deus Ex Machina is in a third, fourth, or fifth book in a series. Why is that? Because writers can finally get away with it and they're exhausted. They're super tired and they're like, dang, I just want to publish this book. Darn it, I just want to get there. And so the publishers are willing to give them a little bit more leeway, a little bit more slack. Whereas when you're trying to originally get published, they're not going to cut you any slack. And by the way, even if you do get traditionally published, your readers aren't going to cut you any slack. So even if your publishers do, don't do it. However, if you're trying to get traditionally published, your first book, and you don't have a contract yet, do not do Deus Ex Machina. People hate Deus Ex Machina. The second a publisher sees Deus Ex Machina, they think this author doesn't know what they're doing, it's a sign of bad writing, they don't know how plotting works, which even if none of that is true, they will make those assumptions. So you need to be careful not to use Deus Ex Machina so they don't make those assumptions about you, because those assumptions might not be true, but they will still make them nonetheless. As well as the fact that with independently publishing, even if you independently publish a novel, the problem with Deus Ex Machina is the fact that your readers will feel cheated. They will feel gypped. They'll feel like, dang it, you completely and utterly cut me out of this. I don't feel relatable to the character anymore. It doesn't feel real. You totally skipped that ending. I don't appreciate what you did here. And unfortunately, that is going to crush you. Because as an independently published author, the way you thrive and your novel becomes a success is through people recommending it to other people. And if a reader feels cheated and doesn't like the ending and feels like you were being lazy as an author, even if you weren't, you just didn't fully explain something or didn't fully flesh something out or didn't foreshadow properly, they'll still feel cheated and they won't recommend your book to other people. Which means that as a result, you will also get less readers, and independent publishing will be harder for you and harder to get more readers. That is why it is so important to avoid Deus Ex Machina, irregardless if you're doing traditional publishing or independent publishing. I hope that you enjoyed this little lesson on Deus Ex Machina. If you have any questions, please go to the email below and make sure to send me your question. I'd be happy to answer your question about Deus Ex Machina, or if you feel that I should do a part 2 to this video because you don't feel I quite explained something well enough, please email me that as well. Subscribe to the American Folk Library YouTube channel for more American Folk Library content, as well as Adult Writers Club content every Thursday evening, so long as I'm not sick. And once a month I will have the in-person meeting with everyone, hopefully getting together. This month once again, I will reiterate, it is March 30th, 2023 from 8 to 9 p.m. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!